This is our second Parent Programs Team Forum for this school year. My name's Carrie Kalin. I am an original member of the Parent Programs team that started in 2001. We are made up of school staff, administration, we have some nurses, some psychologists, and our goal is to have a parent from every building. We're still working on that, so if you're interested, we meet every month, the first Friday of every month through the school year, just for an hour, 11:30 to 12:30. And we're going to have a raffle tonight. So if you want to turn over your evaluation forms, and if you have a smiley face, you are the winner. Awesome. If you want to, I hate to ask you to come up here, but I'm on a cord. He will sign it afterwards, so I'll just give it to you on my way out. We are fully funded by the middle and elementary school PTOs, and the high schools are now also giving us funds to bring in our speakers. We have 3 forums a year. The next one will be in the spring. Watch the listservs. We also have a tab on the Olentangy website. I believe it's under Resources for Parents, and you just scroll down to Parent Programs Team. So we're going to get started tonight. If you can take a moment to silence your phones, that would be great. We don't need Hang On Sloopy. It's coming on. I know this is about technology, but we don't have to have those going. Help me welcome 6'5" NFL star, Nobel Prize winner, Larry Rosen.
All of which was true, of course. None of it was a lie. The 6'5" is only if I'm standing up on the stage. So, just a little bit of background, and I hope I don't fall all over this cord because I walk everywhere. I am a professor emeritus, which, if you don't know Latin, does anybody know Latin? Emeritus in Latin, I believe, is translated as old fart. That's what happens when you've been a professor for 45 years. Eventually, they put you out to pasture. I have been studying what I call the psychology of technology, excuse me, since 1984, when there weren't computers. There were large machines behind solid doors with glass windows so you could watch those people with pocket protectors walking around, and you would key punch a deck of cards and give it to them and hope that your papers came back a bigger stack than this. Well, we've obviously changed since then, and we're living really in an complete age of digital distraction. By the way, I talked to already today 2 groups of senior high school students, one here and one at Orange, is that right? I think. And they were all psychology, AP psychology students, and a lot of what I told them I'm going to tell you tonight. So if you have a student who was there, they've already heard some of this. We're going to talk a little bit about generations, because it turns out that it's important to understand why our generation does not exactly understand the younger generation and how they deal with technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about the positive impacts, because there are positive impacts of technology. There are some good things, and I'll tell you a few of those. I am unfortunately going to have to talk about some of the negative impacts of technology, particularly on our kids, a little bit on us too. I'm going to talk about why we have such a short attention span and why we are so distracted. I'm going to talk a lot about the brain, and I talked to the kids today about their brains and the role that the chemicals in their brain play in sleep and in studying and learning, and why certain things are not good for them. I will tell you the same thing. Ding, ding, ding. That was nice. And I'm going to talk about strategies for how to help your kids, as well as you, focus, attend, and stay healthy. And so we're going to start with generations. Studying generations is interesting to me, partially because I'm old and I belong to the baby boomer generation. I still have 2 living parents who belong to the silent or traditional generation. And then I have kids born in every single one of these generations, except this one, Generation C, which I have grandkids. So a lot of what I've learned about technology is watching them interact with it. Also notice that generations traditionally were about 20 years long, and when you get down to Generation X, all of a sudden you see that those generations shorten considerably. The reason they shorten is because of technology, because technology has come in so rapidly that it has literally changed the values and the way people treat the world. So here's why they're getting shorter. There's something in consumer research called penetration rate. When anything, an idea, a product, anything hits 50 million people, it's assumed that it has now penetrated society. So for those of you who are old enough to remember, radio took 38 years to penetrate society. Telephone took only 20, television took 13, cell phones took 12, then the World Wide Web made a big jump, and that's, by the way, when the net generation was formed, was born, and growing up with the internet. iPods took 3 years, blogs took 3 years, MySpace, remember that? Used to be huge. At one point, MySpace was adding 250,000 people a day for quite a while. So it was big, and now it's almost non-existent. Facebook, you do remember Facebook, right? Facebook is the largest country in the world. Took 2 years. YouTube took only 1, and Angry Birds and Pokemon Go took 35 days each. Now, that may sound funny, but what that means is that an idea, in this case an app, can come into our world and literally change it by 50 million people using it within a month. And that really has a big impact, and it mostly has an impact, I mean, if you look at the 2 different ones that I use as examples, it mostly has an impact on the youth because they're the first ones that use it. The other example, by the way, that's in between the 1-year example and the 35 days is Instagram. Instagram took about 5 months to hit 50 million people, and Instagram is another one of those sites that is being used, again, primarily by young people. So the question is, what are different generations doing with their media? We used to do this research on time, and I'm going to give it to you, but I'm going to tell you it's a little bit old, and so I apologize. But we used to ask, how many hours a day do you use technology? And the way we asked is, how many hours a day are you online? How many hours a day do you watch television? How many hours a day do you use your cell phone? How many hours a day do you play video games? How many hours a day do you listen to music? Things like that. Recognizing that each one was an independent question. So baby boomers told us 8 hours a day. The problem is that they're not really using it 8 hours a day. They're really using it about 5.5 hours a day because they're multitasking. So they're watching TV and using their phone at the same time, and that counts double. So a lot of these numbers are going to sound pretty crazy to you. Generation X, 15 hours a day. That one doesn't sound so crazy. When you get to the net generation, born in the 1980s, 21 hours a day. But as you'll see soon, that's because they multitask more. I generation, 21 hours a day. And Generation C, by the way, the C stands for connected, because the young generation born in the new millennium, I don't want to call them millennials because they deserve actually an acronym or a letter that defines their characteristic, and C defines them perfectly. They are always connected. They are rarely disconnected, so they're always connected 10 hours a day. What we really look at is what technologies do they use 2 hours a day or more, because that tells us what they're really into. I like that. Pages turn. It must be on the next page of the notes. You're going to get to a point, by the way, where your notes aren't going to match what I say because I added stuff today. So sorry, not too much though. So baby boomers, TV more than 2 hours a day, and that's it. Gen Xers, music more than 2 hours a day. That's the highest number amount. Computers, and what computers means is not being online, just using a computer like word processing, spreadsheets, whatever. TV, going online. Those are the 4 things that Generation X do 2 hours a day or more. Music most, and then down to going online. When you get to the net generation, music is number 1. That's why they always have earbuds plugged in. Music is number 1. TV is still number 2. TV is one of the most common activities that is done. It's just that it's not necessarily done on a traditional television set anymore, but it's still watching television. Going online and texting shows up for the net generation as, again, 2 hours or more, but the 4th most common. Now when you look at the younger generation, what you see is the I generation. Music, texting is number 2, going online is number 3, Facebook is number 4, instant message and chat is number 5, and when you get to young generation, you see, you see TV and video games, and actually what didn't get on there, because I didn't change it, is going online also 2 hours or more a day. So the question is, and this is what we study a lot in our research and in other people's research, is what does this do to our health? And by health, I mean emotional health, physical health, all kind of health that you can imagine. So let's go over here. Let's talk first about the good, because I think you should start off being positive. So on a social level, there's a lot of good things to be said about technology and how it helps. For one, and you know this, that there's always somebody out there, 24/7, 365. If you really need to talk to somebody, there's somebody out there. And I'm going to show you some data in a bit about how that really helps kids potentially feel better about themselves, particularly if they're feeling slightly depressed. It helps you maintain distance relationships, people that you don't see because they're not close enough to you. And it helps you feeling more socially supported, and I'm going to give you some of the data on that too, is how that works. On a mental level, there's always information. There's always, any question you want the answer to, you can ask. Just say, hey Siri, and she'll answer your question. You may not like the answer, but she will answer any question. And that's called the Google effect. The Google effect means that you no longer have to have an internal memory, you can have an external memory. And Google becomes your external memory. There actually have been studies showing that if you look something up on Google, if I have you look something up on Google and then 2 weeks later ask you the answer of the question, you won't know the answer to the question, but you will know exactly where to find it. That's the Google effect. Is that bad? I think it's great. I think we can answer any question we want at any time. I worry what will happen to our brains if all of a sudden that technology disappears, but until then, we've got a good external memory. From the psychological point of view, and this is where it gets a little complex because there's both the good and the bad. From a psychological point of view, there is research that shows that being online, and particularly social media, can decrease feelings of loneliness. There's also research that shows that it can increase your sense of self-esteem. There's also research that shows that it can reduce depression. And then finally, it can also enable empathy. And I want to talk about that because I think for teenagers and even younger kids, that empathy becomes very important. Having someone out there that you can talk to who understands your feelings and can relay back to you how they understand it is important. So we did a study way back in 2015. Anything more than a year old seems terribly old. We did a study where we looked at about 1,400 net generation college students. Our students are a little bit older, so most of our studies, the average age is 23, 24, 25, something like that. So they're really sort of older young college students, if that makes sense. And what we did is we gave them several different measures. We took a measure called the Real World Empathy Measure, which actually measured how empathic you are in the real world. How many things do you do that make you show empathy to other people in the real world? We also adapted that to how much empathy do you dispense in the virtual world, online. And then we looked particularly, and this is important, we looked at perceived social support. How supported do you feel by people in your world? And then we looked at, as always, how much technology they use. The results were interesting, I think. More online empathy meant you felt socially supported. If you got more online empathy in general, or you dispensed more online empathy, you felt socially supported, but real world empathy was 5 to 6 times more effective in feeling socially supported. So, I'm going to say that again because it's very important. There is online empathy. People can feel empathy coming from somebody online. If they post something and somebody writes something back that's empathic, they can feel that. It makes them feel socially supported. The problem is it's not as good as getting a hug in the real world. The interesting thing I thought was, and I was talking about this earlier with someone, that video gaming, those who play more video games tend to have less empathy in the real world. So those of you who have kids who play video games, that's something you have to watch for. I think what this is it takes about 5.5 virtual hugs to equal 1 real hug. Not that that's bad. You can get 5.5 virtual hugs in the virtual world pretty easily. You may not be able to get one real hug. So now the good and the bad psychologically. We did a study with adults and teenagers, and we gave them a measure, literally that measured Axis 1 and Axis 2 psychiatric disorders. And we looked particularly at which technologies might predict who has more or less symptoms of a particular psychiatric disorder. So, interestingly enough, dysthymia, which is basically mild depression, showed a positive result. If you had more Facebook friends, you had less symptoms of dysthymia, coupled with if you talked more on the telephone, you had less symptoms of dysthymia. It took both of them together. So the natural leap that I would try to make is that if you have more people out there online, more Facebook friends, and then you talk to them online, and then you talk to people on the phone also, that helps you get out of that beginnings of depression, that light level of depression. That's the good news. The bad news is that more time on the telephone makes less symptoms of major depression, and more Facebook friends makes less symptoms of major depression. But if you're online more, you have more symptoms. And so that's sort of almost a contradiction there. But they call it Facebook depression. It has actually a real title, Facebook depression. It's Facebook ordinarily, having a lot of friends makes you feel good, but if you spend more time just online in general, not on Facebook, but just online in general, you probably have more symptoms of major depression. So, some of the bad. This is an interesting study out of UCLA that I really like, and I like to talk to parents about this because it shows how important screen time is in helping you or not helping you. So in California, all of the kids in 6th grade go to outdoor camp. I don't know, do they do that here? Okay, so all the kids go to outdoor camp for 5 days. Yalda Uhls, who's a professor at UCLA, did a study with a huge research group. And what they did is they took a group of kids who were 6th graders who were going to go to camp the next week, and then they had a group waiting that was going to go to camp 2 weeks later. What they gave them was a series of pictures that looked like this, and asked them, what emotion is this person showing? What about this person? What about this person? That one just looks crazy. What about this person? What about this? So each one they had to show what emotions the person was showing, plus they showed them a videotape without the sound and asked them what was going on emotionally in the videotape. So they got a sense before they went to camp of how good a job they could do at identifying someone else's emotions. After the camp, but before the other group went to camp, they did it again. So after 5 days at camp with no screens, you're not allowed to bring screens, they don't work anyway in the mountains. After 5 days in camp, they did it again. What do you think happened? Those people who had no technology for 5 days did better at identifying emotions than the control group who were still using their screens. The problem is, did the improvements maintain? And the answer is, probably not. I've talked to Yalda Uhls extensively about this, and she doesn't want to do a follow-up because she doesn't want to be depressed. Because quite honestly, she thinks that they found the results because right after 5 days of no screens, 5 days of having to look at people in the face when you're talking to them, actually looking you right in the eye when you're at camp and talking to them, they could identify emotions better. But she's afraid that that's just going to go away immediately as soon as they start their screens looking down like these kids are. So most of my research is on distraction. That's what my new book is on, and that's what I like to study because I think it's fascinating as to why we are so distracted. I was pointing out earlier that when I walked in and there were just a few people in here, almost everybody, all of the adults in here had their phones out, which I thought was kind of interesting. So what about technology as distracting? I think what you find is technology is distracting in 2 ways. One, in the outside world. In the real world, you get your phone beeps. Everybody put their phone on. Did I put my phone on vibrate? No, see, I didn't even do that. I didn't even put my phone off. Off. Your phones beep, they buzz, they vibrate, they do everything but jump up and grab you by the throat and say, pay attention to me, which is what they're doing. Have you ever had your pocket vibrate and you think your phone is vibrating, that you must have a message, and you pull it out and look and there's nothing there? called phantom pocket vibration syndrome. It is a real syndrome. It happens to somewhere above 80% of the people at least once a week. Why is that, by the way? Why is before you had a smartphone, if you'd have felt a little vibration down here, like a little tingle down there, what would you have done? If it was me, I'd have gone like this and scratched, because it would have been an itch, right? We don't even think of it as an itch anymore. It's our phone vibrating. Even if our phone's in this pocket, we think it's our phone vibrating in this pocket. By the way, if you look at teenagers and young adults, they no longer carry their phone in their pocket. Where do they carry it? In their hand. Most teenagers, if you walk around and watch them, most teenagers will carry their phone in their hand. Why is that? Because they want to feel that vibration immediately. They want that immediate gratification of that vibration. And television has changed too. I grew up with my kids watching Sesame Street, for example, and if you watch Sesame Street 20 years ago, the scenes were usually about a minute and a half long. Now the scenes on Sesame Street are anywhere between 20 seconds and 30 seconds. Why is that? Because they recognize that our attention spans have shrunk and that they can't keep kids' attentions if they have a minute and a half of one specific scene. When I was growing up, and most of you are way younger than I am, when I was growing up, television shows were things like Father Knows Best or Perry Mason. And if you ever want to see something strange that will bore you to tears, go watch one of those, because the scenes are like 3 minutes long. And our attention span is no longer 3 minutes long. We cannot watch that and sit, and that's our issue. The other part of distraction comes not from the outside, but from the inside. And I'm going to talk a lot about why this happens. But the inside of our brain is always thinking, and usually when we talk about kids, it's thinking about who might have texted me, who might have Snapchatted me, who commented on the Facebook post that I did yesterday, who's made a comment on my Instagram post, what new followers do I have? It's all about the brain telling the person that they need to check in. We also seem to have a lower boredom threshold, and I think that the easiest way to see that is to just make somebody bored and see what happens. They will immediately grab their phone. And this is not, I don't say teenagers, this is everybody. Me too, you too. If you get bored, the natural thing to do is, well, this device has got something to entertain me. Did you just hit him? Is that what you do? You've been nailed. So, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the kids. By show of hands, can you eat and play a board game at the same time? Everybody should be able to do that, right? That's pretty easy. Can you read a book and listen to music? That's an interesting one because the older you are, the less easy that is. That's what the research shows. And since I'm really old, I can't do that. If there's music on in the background, even if it's a song that I really know well, I can't follow the book. I can't do both. I can't multitask or task switch. Can you surf the internet and listen to music? I would say most of you could probably do that. All the kids raised their hand for that one. Can you read a book and watch TV? I was surprised. A lot of the kids said they could do that because that's how they do their homework. But it is a very difficult task. If you want to see how difficult it is, turn on CNN and try to just read the scroll bar and listen to Anderson Cooper at the same time. Or just try listening to Anderson Cooper and look at the scroll bar and see if you get anything. You can't do both at the same time. How about read a book and talk on the phone? Some of the kids raised their hands and I said, isn't that kind of rude? They said, yeah, kind of. How about read a book, text, Facebook, listen to music with the TV on? That's the way most kids study. That is their studying situation. So one of the things that we look at in terms of multitasking is intention and perception. And we did 2 studies in 2008 and in 2014. We asked the following question. Do you attempt to do 2 activities at the same time? And we gave them a series of pairs of activities. They came from pairing 9 tech tasks with themselves and with 3 non-technical tasks. So we might say, do you attempt to go online and eat at the same time? So it's kind of like I had you raise your hands, right? It's the same thing. Do you attempt to play video games and watch TV at the same time? Turns out it makes 66 combinations if anybody really cares mathematically. I'm going to give you some charts, and I'm going to key you in just to colors because it's easier. The pink squares show that they attempted to combine these two tasks less than half the time. The yellow is between half and 3/4 of the time, and the green means they're basically attempting to do it all the time. So here's the baby boomer generation, and you can see a lot of pink. Particularly, this is reading a book. They can't combine reading a book with hardly anything, or playing video games, or texting. So you can see that basically, baby boomers attempt or believe they can do it about 59% of the time, 59% of the tasks. Generation X, a little younger, 67% of the tasks. You see less pink, more yellow and green. Net generation believe they can do 75% of the task pairs. And you notice that almost everything is green or yellow and very little pink. The pink, by the way, is being on a computer, not online, but being on a computer and playing video games, being on a computer and reading a book, and playing video games and reading a book. Those three things they claim are too difficult to do. So what happens 6 years later? We did exactly the same task, not with the same people, but with the same age groups of people. So here's the baby boomers. Remember, 59% of the tasks in 2008, up to, what the hell happened there? 67% in, 74%, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Let's go backwards. Nope, sorry, it just got squished. Generation X went from 67% to 70%. By the way, that was the smallest jump of any generation. The net generation went from 75 to 81% of the time, and you can see it's almost all green for the net generation. There's no pink left whatsoever. What about the I generation, those born in the 1990s? What's your guess is what it's going to look like? Pretty much all green. The I generation believe that they can combine 87% of those tasks. And some of those tasks are very difficult to combine. They still believe they can do it. So perceptually, young kids, young adults believe that they can multitask. They believe they can do two things together. In fact, the answer is they can't. And we can show that. Those who text during class get lower grades in class. Those college students who self-interrupt to check their email or social media, they check every 2 to 3 minutes in class. And if they do that, they take worse notes and get lower scores in class. And if you don't know what to do with your phone in class, meaning you don't know to put it away, to silence it, whatever, you have a worse GPA. So one of the things that we were interested in doing is watching how students study. And we modeled this after some other research, but we actually went into the home of middle school, high school, and college students. We asked them, can we watch your child, your son or daughter, study where they study? And we tried to pair them up with people they already knew so it wasn't uncomfortable. And what we told the person is, the observer, I want you to go in and I want you to observe this student, middle school, high school, or college student, studying for 15 minutes. And what the student is supposed to be told is, I want you to study something supremely important for 15 minutes. Not just study anything, but study something really important. We gave them examples like studying for a test, reading material for a report, taking notes for something that's important. Because we hoped that for 15 minutes they could maintain and study for 15 minutes. So we tried to stack the deck on their part. Every minute we took a look at what they were doing. So my researchers all had a stopwatch, and it dinged quietly. Every minute they looked up. If the person said they were studying chemistry and they were literally looking at the chemistry book or studying some chemistry, yes, they're on task. If they were going out and getting a sandwich or something, off task. If they were looking at their phone, off task. We also looked at what exactly was on their computer screen, how much technology they used each day. Very important, we asked about study strategies. Did they really know how to study? Because we're asking them to study. We looked at something called preference for task switching, which is really simple. We asked them a question. Do you prefer to work on something until it's completely done, or work on it a little, then switch to something else, then work on that, then switch back, and then work on that, and switch back? That's called task switching. It's called a preference for task switching. It's not necessarily what they do, which they do actually, but it's their preference. And then we measured their GPA, because GPA was sort of a constant across middle school, high school, and college. They're all on a 4-point scale. So This is what happened over the 15 minutes. Here's minute 1 to 15, and this is the percentage of time they're on task. Now, you can't see these little numbers, but here's 70%. On average, even though they knew we were watching them, and it didn't matter whether it was middle school, high school, or college, they were all the same. They knew we were watching them. We thought they were supposed to be studying. They only studied about 60 to 65% of the time, meaning out of the 15 minutes, they were only studying about 9 of those minutes. And watch what happens. They study for a few minutes, then they get distracted. Then they study for a few minutes, then they get really distracted. At the 8, 9, 10 minute mark, they get really distracted. Then they start to focus again. We kind of think this is an artifact. My guess is internally what they're saying to themselves is, oh my God, I haven't been studying. I better look like I'm studying. I better start studying. But you notice at the 15-minute mark, they're already starting to go down. And I believe that this is the pattern we would have found if we watched them for 5 hours. Is about 3 to 4 minutes of studying, distraction. 3 to 4 minutes of studying, distraction. So the question is, what are they doing? Well, this is, remember I told you that we also looked at their screen, their computer screen, and what was on there. This is the number of windows that they had open over time. Notice where this peak is, at 8 to 9, 10 minute mark. That's why they get so distracted, because they're opening more windows. And the students who were most off task had the most windows open. We also said, now that we have their GPA, let's see if we can predict their GPA and what kind of important information did we learn from just watching them for 15 minutes to predict their GPA. You won't be surprised that the best predictor, those who stayed on task more, had a better GPA. Something to tell your kids. The longer you can stay on task, the better GPA you'll get. Those who had strategies for studying had a better GPA. That also makes sense. Those who preferred not to task switch had a better GPA. That means they preferred not to go from here to here, here to here, and bounce back and forth. Those who used less media each day, we actually had that total amount of hours of media that they used, had a better GPA. And then we looked at, every minute we looked at what website was in the main screen of their computer or their phone, whatever they happen to be looking at the moment. And we checked to see if any website specifically predicted a lower GPA, and only one did. Any guess? Facebook. All they had to do was check Facebook once. Not 5 times, not 10 times, not 15 times, once. Checking it one time was enough to have a lower GPA. So, now what happens when they're reading? Because students have to spend a lot of time reading. And so there's this really interesting study done by Laura Bowman at Central Connecticut State. And it's a very simple study. She had a control group who read some text from a screen. Actually, it turned out it was a chapter in a psychology book. It was kind of interesting. And they took a test. Her second group started with an instant message conversation between her in another room and the student. Went on for a couple of minutes, about 5, 7 minutes, something like that. Then they read the text and they took the test. None of those are what our students do. Here's what our students do. They start reading. They get interrupted by an instant message conversation. And what she did is she interrupted them constantly, the same amount of total time interrupted, but like a minute, and then she'd let them go back and read, and then like another minute or two interruption, and then she'd let them go back and read, and another minute or two interruption, just like they study at home. Then they continue to read and take the test. So here's the question. Who took longer to finish the chapter in the test? Third group, right? Because they kept getting interrupted. So they took longer. Who performed better on the test? It's a trick question. They actually all did equally well. But who showed more stress? The third group. So the third group, our kids, the way they study, they can do just as well. It takes longer and there's more stress. Neither of which is good. So we talk a lot in psychology about metacognition, which is kind of knowing how your brain works, knowing when it's best to put your technology away, knowing when it's best to study with technology and without it. Also knowing when your brain's kind of overloaded from too much gaming, too much technology, too much. So here's some metacognitive questions that I think you should ask your kids or your students. The best room for me to study at home is blank because blank. I think that's a really important question. Most of the kids will say, what? Where's the best room to study? their bedroom. Why? Because mom and dad won't bother me. Because I can do what I want. Because I can have my technology there. Whatever reason, that's their answer. That may not be the best metacognitive reason though. Some ways that I can avoid distractions while studying at home are, most teenagers can't answer that question. Because they don't think of them as distractions, they think of them as part of their world. A good place for me to put my phone before class or before studying is, the answer I get from most students is right next to me. And then, if I use technology in class, some ways that I can make sure I don't get distracted are, that question flummoxes them. They literally don't know the answer to that. So here's what metacognition can do to you. This is a study we did where we took 4 psychology classes, freshman, sophomore level psychology classes at a college. And we got all of their phone numbers and permission to text them. And what we said is, we're going to show you a videotape. It was a videotape about psychology. And you're going to be tested on it right after the videotape's done. And oh, by the way, the reason we took your phone numbers last week was because we may send you a text during the video. And now, here's my biggest mistake ever, because here's what I said to them. When we text you, please respond and text back. That doesn't sound like a mistake, but you'll see in a second why it was a mistake. Some of them got no text from us, some of them got 4 texts, some of them got 8 texts. The texts, however, were timed to arrive at their phone at the exact instant that the material on the videotape was going to be on the test. That was no mean feat. We had to actually have 5 people outside the classroom, one texting everybody who was on AT&T, one texting everybody who was on T-Mobile, one texting everybody on each of the different services, because they go faster if you're texting from the same service. So in order to time it right, we had to do that, but we managed to do it. And the questions we asked were not the kind of questions that they could just say LOL or JK or something like that. They were the kind of questions that they had to actually have an answer, like, what is your major and why did you choose it? You can't just say LOL. Turns out that we made them, on the average, have 9-word answers, so they really had to think. We tried to disrupt them. So here's the results. The group that got no text got a C. That's exactly the way we planned it. Interestingly enough, the group that got 4 texts also got a C and didn't differ at all. So the 4 texts didn't seem to bother them. The group that got 8 texts in the 30 minutes got a D. That was the least interesting part of this study, because what we found was those who interpreted our instructions as, when you get a text, immediately text us back, got a C. Some people waited a few minutes to text us back, and those people got an A. Now, we had their phone numbers, we knew who they were, so we texted them. We didn't call them because we knew they would never answer the phones. We said, you didn't follow our instructions. And they said, of course we followed your instructions. And we said, no, you didn't text us back immediately. You didn't tell us to text back immediately. You just said, we're going to send you a text us back. We said, well, why'd you wait? And to a person, they said, we waited until there was something on the videotape that we knew wouldn't be on the test. That is metacognition. That's knowing when it's appropriate to use your technology and when it's not. Everyday distractions. Research has shown that teens and young adults switch tasks every 2 minutes. If they're waiting for something to load on the computer, they begin to leave if more than 2 seconds to load. After a 10-second delay, 2/3 have gone. 10 seconds is about their limit of being able to tolerate it. And a recent Microsoft study came out and said that our attention span is now 9 seconds, which is less than that of a goldfish. I did not know that goldfish had an attention span, by the way. That was a little interesting, but we have a lower attention span than a goldfish. And if Microsoft said it, then we should believe it. We actually installed apps on our students' phones that measured how many times they unlocked their phone and how many total minutes it remained unlocked for the day. And our students unlock their phones 60 times a day. That's about every 15 waking minutes, for a total of almost 4 hours at about 3 to 4 minutes per time. I had this app installed on my phone for exactly 1 day. At noon, it said I'd already unlocked my phone 100 times, and I stopped. There's lots of interesting research now that shows that walking while using your phone, you walk differently. you modify your gait, and you also veer out of your path, and there's an increased number of accidents due to people walking and using their phone. And driving, sorry to tell you, when your kids are able to drive, at least half of all students text or talk when they're driving. Now, there's a new line of study that I wanted, it's brand new, and I just wanted to share it with you because I think it's important. I'm not sure that I understand all of it yet, but the design is always the same in these studies. They bring two people into a lab, and they have them sit opposite each other in these two chairs. If those look like chairs, I think they kind of look like chairs. And then they have on a table here either a phone or a book that's the size of a phone, okay? And it's generally not the phone of anybody in the study, but can be. But and the book is not anybody's either, but they're both the same size. What they find is if you're talking with someone and it's not even your phone, you rate that person you're talking with as less trustworthy if there's a phone there compared to if there's a book there. We're still working on understanding that. You also believe that you have less empathy for that person if there's a phone in your presence. If the phone is ringing in the background, if you're studying material, you retain less of the material and you get more stressed. If the phone is around but not ringing, you perform worse if you're doing a difficult task but not an easy task. So there's something just about the physical presence of the phone. The phone's sitting there that's disruptive. By the way, if anybody attended the 2013 Consumer Electronics Show, you were lucky to see the brand new iPotty. I think this is sort of the ultimate. This is taking the porta potty for your children's potty training and then leaving a place to insert the iPad so that certainly our little child does not get bored while they're trying to potty train. By the way, this product had a little asterisk that said, does not come with iPad. So where I am now is looking inside the brain. I've decided that along with all of the money that's going into brain projects, that I think that's where everything is happening. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what we've learned about teenage brains and about brains in general. So first of all, we figured out that most of the problem is right behind their forehead, right here. This is called the prefrontal cortex. That's me having my prefrontal cortex scanned. And the information down here is showing that there are 8 boxes across the top and 8 boxes across the bottom, 16 places that are measuring my prefrontal cortex. The measurements on this side are my attention, whether I'm attending or not. The measurements on this side are what's called working memory, whether I'm working internally on a problem. The ones in the middle have to do with multitasking, and then there are some other things like decision making and impulse control that are controlled across my entire forehead. If you want to see somebody actually doing this in real life, go on Netflix and look at Chelsea Handler's documentary called Chelsea Does Silicon Valley. She came into our lab and we scanned her forehead. She was happy to know that she had a brain. So when children are born, they have nerve cells. Are there scientists here? Biologists, scientists? Because everything I'm going to say is a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you're not scientists, you're never going to know, so it's okay. So when you're born, you have a lot of nerve cells, but these nerve cells are kind of like the wire inside here. Why do we wrap this rubber stuff around the wire? So we don't get shocked, right? All of our nerve cells when we're born are like this wire that's inside here without the coating. And the coating starts coming on. The coating is called myelin, and they're little fatty cells that wrap themselves around, just like this wraps itself around here. That's why, by the way, when babies are born, they tell you to swaddle them, because if you don't, they go like this, jumpy arms and everything. That's the nerves firing with no way to coat the nerve cells, so the signals just disappear. They just go off everywhere. After a while, some of these fatty cells start going and coating the cells, and pretty soon, they're all myelinated. The problem is the last area to be myelinated is right here, your prefrontal cortex, your controller, the thing that guides your entire brain. And if you look at when you have enough myelin in your brain, it's at around 25 to 35 years old. So you are basically looking at kids growing up who have a prefrontal cortex that is supposed to be making all the decisions for them, that is a bunch of loose wires in there that are not working all that well. Now, for those of you who are a little older, the amount of myelin starts decreasing after the age of 45, which is why when you get to be my age, you walk into the kitchen and you open the refrigerator and you go, why am I here? Or you start looking for your keys and you keep looking in the same places. That's all because you're being demyelinated. There are also, by the way, some serious diseases that are caused by demyelination, by the myelin sheath, the the fatty cells disintegrating and going away. Did a study looking at whether technology is good or bad for kids' health. What we did is we asked parents of children, preteens, and teens. The parents answered for their kids because the kids were too young to answer themselves. We asked them a tremendous amount of questions about their health, psychological health, physical health, behavioral health, attentional health, whether they're able to attend and focus on tasks. We looked at their eating habits, their exercise, their media use, and we asked, does media use predict poor health after we account for what we know? Parents' demographics, if the parents are heavier, the kids are going to have worse health. We know that, science has proven that. If the kids exercise, we know that they're going to have better health. If the kids have poor eating habits, we know they're going to have worse health. So really what we asked is this. We know that media use makes you lack of exercise, become a couch potato, and that leads to poor health. We know that media use leads to unhealthy eating, all those snacks that you and your kids eat at the computer, not me, leads to poor health. Our question was, is this link there? So after we factor out the idea of poor eating habits, lack of exercise, poor genetics, and everything, is that there? For children, it was there. Those children who used more media during a day had worse health. All of them, by the way. Psychological, physical, behavioral, and attention. All of them. Preteens, same thing. Those who used more media during the day had worse health, but also those who played more video games had worse health. This is preteens. When you get to teenagers, those who had more media use during the day had worse health, those who played more video games had worse health, and those who spent more hours online had worse health. So I think it's really about brain chemistry. And really, I'm going to talk about two systems because they're similar and very different. There is the stress system, which are the neurotransmitters and the hormones and the molecules in your brain that lead to stress. They're the ones that make your palms sweat. They're the ones that make your heart palpitate. The major one that you might have heard of is cortisol. And it's the primary one, but there are other ones in there too. And then there's what's called the dopaminergic system. This is the pleasure system. These are the chemicals in your brain that make you feel so good. These are the chemicals in your brain, in the brain of kids who play video games, that make them want to play video games. Because when they play a video game, they get a little squirt maybe of dopamine, maybe a little squirt of serotonin, which makes them happy, maybe a little norepinephrine. All of these are good chemicals, make them feel really good. Unfortunately, they're also bad for addictions. All addicts have an abundance of these chemicals running around. It doesn't matter what kind of addiction it is. So we wanted to look and see about anxiety, because I think a lot of what we're seeing in our kids right now is anxiety rampant. And I've been talking to a lot of the counselors today, and they verify that they're seeing a lot more kids for counseling based on anxiety issues, being anxious about things. So we wanted to see if we could make people anxious. So what we did is we brought 163 college students into a room just like this. Half of them came in that door, and when they came in, each one was instructed, go sit down, don't sit right next to somebody, leave a blank seat between you and the next person, put all of your books and stuff underneath the seat, and turn your phone off and put it under the seat. The other half came through this door, and we said exactly the same instructions, except we said, give us your phone, here's a claim check. We thought that was going to really upset them. Turned out it didn't matter. Turned out it didn't matter whether we took away their phone or put it under their desk so they couldn't see it and use it, and I'll show you why. What we did is we measured anxiety, and we just did it with a paper and pencil measure that's been used for decades called the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, and we measured it 3 times. 10 minutes into them sitting there doing nothing. Oh, by the way, they weren't allowed to do anything. They were told they were all in there for extra credit. Students just love extra credit. They die for extra credit points. So they were there for extra credit, and we told them that if you talk to your neighbor, if you touch your phone, if you touch your books, you do anything, you're out of here, you lose your extra credit. So I think we had to throw out 3 people out of 160-something people. So here's the results. First of all, we split them into 3 groups: light users, moderate users, and heavy users. And we split them up based on their use only of their smartphone. Not computers, not video games, nothing else, just their smartphones. So light phone users showed low anxiety, no change. Flat. They were as anxious at the end as they were at the beginning. The moderate users started at the same place 10 minutes in, but then got anxious. But then their anxiety sort of leveled off, and they kept that level of anxiety for the rest of the study. What about the heavy users? What do you think happened to them? 10 minutes in, they were already more anxious. They got more anxious, and actually, one of my colleagues who was running this study was actually going to run it for 75 minutes. She was going to have another 15-minute period, and she stopped. And the reason she said she stopped is because she was afraid people were going to die. She said she said you felt in the room like you could cut the anxiety with the scissors. There was so much anxiety floating around there. So, what do we need to keep our brains healthy? First of all, and foremost, I think we need time away from technology. And for younger people, this is really important, because if you remember the no screens up in the mountains study, if we take away their screens, if we give them time away, they can practice communication skills. They can practice face-to-face communications. They can see when I smile, they can see what I mean. That was a fake smile, so you probably go, that's a fake smile, I know what he means. He's not real. But at least they can develop those skills. They also need time to practice creative thinking. Technology often does not allow creative thinking. It's very much kind of rote, look something up, make a comment, like something, favorite something, tweet something. It's not really creative. When you take technology away, it allows you to be a little more creative. And also to instill calmness. Technology tends to rattle people, particularly the kinds of technologies like video gaming tends to make people a little more hyper and get a little more rattled. I think they need a little red button behind their ear that they press every once in a while and reset their brain. I honest to God think we'll have one of those somewhere in the future, but until we do, I'm going to give you some ideas of how to help them reset their brain. They need sleep, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sleep and why they don't do that. Why does the brain need sleep? The kids laughed at me today. Doctors recommend 9 hours per night for preteens and teenagers, and I asked them, how many of you got 9 hours of sleep last night? I think I got 2 hands out of 250 students. That was it. The average teen sleeps about 6 hours a night during school, you know that, and then they desperately try to make up for it on the weekend by sleeping in. My daughter used to take 20-minute power naps that turned out to be 8-hour power naps. One time she said, I'm going down for a power nap, wake me up in 20 minutes. I set my alarm for 20 minutes, I went in and woke her up. I'm going to take another 20 minutes. Did that 5 times, and finally I said, honey, I'm no longer waking you up, go to sleep. The next morning she said, why did you never come in and wake me up? I did, honey, I did, honest to goodness. If you do the math, by the way, and believe that it's true, the National Sleep Foundation says that they need 9 hours of sleep a night, they are working at what's called sleep debt, and they're 12 hours per week sleep debt. And this is not a monetary debt that you can forgive. This is a sleep debt that can only be forgiven by sleeping. So our teenagers are building up this massive sleep debt, which is why they fall asleep in class a lot, which is why they put their head on the table and they're out like a light. 80% of teenagers in all research say that they rarely or never get a good night's sleep. So, why is sleep critical? First of all, contrary to popular opinion, our brains are almost as active during sleep as they are when we're awake. They're about 5% less active, and that's all right here, which means their executive controller is kind of shut off, and the rest of their brain's just kind of free going. And I'll explain to you what it's doing. It's doing what's called synaptic rejuvenation. It's three things. One's consolidation, which I told the kids today. All consolidation means is that your brain spends the night practicing. Everything you learn during the day, it's literally practicing in the background while you're sleeping. And stuff that it thinks you don't need to know gets pruned away. And I gave the example, you're wearing a blue jacket today. By tomorrow after I sleep tonight, I will not remember that you're wearing a blue jacket because my brain will go, I don't need to know that, I'm not going to see you again. Why would I care if you're wearing a blue jacket? The other thing our brain does, which I think is scary, is not the action of what it does, but the ramifications, is that our spinal column opens up, spinal cord opens up just a tad, part of a millimeter, and sends more spinal fluid up to our brain. And the reason it does that is because during the day, when we are thinking, the byproducts of thinking are actually floating molecules in our brain. Lots of little molecules floating around in our brain that were not used or were used up. The valuable parts of it were used up and they're just floating around. This fluid is designed basically to kind of give your brain a wash. It goes up, it circulates in the brain, and it continues to wash out those molecules. If you don't get a good night's sleep, it doesn't do it. It, honest to goodness, doesn't do it. Now that's not so bad, that just means you have a bunch of stuff floating around your brain, right? Many of those particles are called amyloid betas. Do you know what amyloid betas are? If you don't know what amyloid betas are, when you have lots of amyloid betas, they clump together and they're called plaque. When you have plaque in your brain, what does that mean? Well, when they examine the brains of Alzheimer's patients, they find that they have a preponderance of plaque in their brain, which means that plaque in the brain, amyloid betas, are primarily responsible for people who have Alzheimer's not being able to remember things, not being able to follow instructions, not being able to do things. So imagine your kids who are not sleeping well, not getting a good night's sleep, the amyloid betas are not flushing out, they're turning into plaques, and they're inhibiting learning. That's the scary part. The other thing that happens at night, and particularly during dreaming states, is your brain flips into this thing called the default mode network, which is just four little areas all activate, and the rest of your brain kind of gets quiet. And that's exactly what your brain does when your mind is wandering, when you have creative ideas, when you're daydreaming. It's kind of the best part of your brain. Creative thinking, daydreaming, real dreaming. And then the third thing that happens is what's called neuroplasticity, which just means during the night of good sleep, new neurons, new connections, new axons, new dendrites, all the pieces in there are happening. I taught the kids a little bit today about sleep, and I don't know how much you know about sleep, but I'll give you my 2-second thing on it. Good night's sleep is important, and the reason it's important is because we go through cycles. You start, fall asleep, kind of a light sleep, that's why you startle awake sometimes when you first fall asleep. Get deeper and deeper and deeper into sleep, and then lighter and lighter, and then you have a dream. That process takes about 90 minutes. In a well-rested person, it takes 90 minutes. What happens if you're not well-rested? You ever had a time when you just, like you were so exhausted, you just passed out and took a nap? What happens when you do that is you immediately start dreaming. All of a sudden you get these dream images. So all this stuff that was supposed to happen doesn't happen. So we go through these 90-minute cycles. By the way, the dreams get longer and longer the night. The first dream is about 2 minutes. Thank you, my 10-minute warning. First dream is about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes. By the time you get to your fourth dream, it's about an hour, which if you kind of do the math and add the 90 minutes, if you have a normal night's sleep of 7.5 to 8 hours, you wake up in a dream. During those stages, deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, all the synaptic rejuvenation happens. And during the REM sleep, the default mode happens. What happens if it's disrupted? You do instant dreaming, your cycles are disrupted, and you don't learn as well. You just simply don't learn as well. I actually am a victim of this, by the way. I was a terrible sleeper. I thought, I can get by on 4 hours of sleep a night. I can do this, and I did this all the way from when I was a teenager, all the way until about 5 years ago. And I'm sure that my brain is impacted negatively by that. When we look at what teens do in the last hour before sleep, they're primarily on their phone. Why is that important? the simple answer to why is it important. When dusk happens, when it starts to get dark outside, it starts to get dusk, the sky changes color, changes into some sort of shade of red or pink, orange. Any shade in that area, in that part of the spectrum, does something special to our brain. What it does is it starts the release of melatonin. So as soon as the sun starts going down, your brain sees that, and it starts releasing melatonin, okay? If we have a normal night, the melatonin is released, and 4, 5, 6 hours later, we fall asleep. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that everything that we have that emits light right now is emitted by a light-emitting diode, an LED. What kind of light does an LED emit? LEDs emit light in the blue wave spectrum mostly. What happens when we wake up and we see blue outside? It starts to wake us up, right? Do you know why it wakes us up? It wakes us up because blue light stimulates cortisol. Cortisol in little bits starts to wake you up. A little bit of cortisol is actually pretty good for you, it wakes you up. Now, go back to the night before. Your melatonin is building up, and it's building up and it's getting you tired, and all of a sudden now you're looking at your smartphone and blue light is coming out. What does blue light do? It retards melatonin. It shuts the melatonin off. So the National Sleep Foundation, let's see if I have this. The other thing is all the studies show that, and I confirm this with all the kids today, all the studies show that 75% of teenagers and young adults sleep with their phone next to their bed with the ringer on. And if you don't believe that, ask your kids, because they all told me today, I think about 90% of them said they sleep with their phone next to the bed within arm's length, and almost half of them, if not more, said they at least leave the vibration on or the ringer on. And half of the people check their phone for something at night, and it's not the time, it's something else. They check for text messages, for Snapchats, etc. So what predicts a poor night's sleep? We did a study, and I'm going to just flip through this because I want to show you the picture. So here's the picture. It looks complicated, but it's really not. Here's poor sleep quality. What predicts poor sleep quality? More smartphone use, where they put their phone, if it's next to the bed, and how many times they wake up in the middle of the night. But what also predicts those is what we call technological anxiety. That's those signals from in the brain saying, I haven't checked into Facebook for 15 minutes, I better check in. I better make sure that somebody has liked my post. That predicts more use, it predicts multitasking, it predicts more waking up at night to check, which predicts worse sleep. And then there's the prefrontal cortex, which predicts more waking up at night, and by itself predicts poor sleep. So there's a lot of things that predict poor sleep. They're all centered around the phone use at night. The National Sleep Foundation says no active phone use during the last hour before sleep. 0. That's sometimes difficult. The Mayo Clinic says 14 inches away, dim the light. 14 inches is try to hold an iPad 14 inches away for a while, and it's very difficult. The kids will prop it on their laps and stuff. You don't have to dim the screens manually. There are apps that will dim the screens. A lot of people use something called Flux, that if you put Flux on, as soon as it gets toward nighttime, it makes your screen start to look pinker and pinker and pinker. The reason it makes it look pinker is it's shutting down the blue light, increasing the red light, so that the melatonin is released. You can simulate that by just turning down the light, dimming the light on devices. The other recommendation that everybody has is limited technology use, only passive or well-learned. And what I mean by well-learned is maybe reading a paper book. First of all, the light bouncing off a paper book is not LED light, it's not blue. In fact, turns out it's more in the red spectrum anyway. And so that helps put you to sleep. And recommending, if you're going to read a book, dim the lights a little bit, makes it a little more pink, makes the melatonin start flooding in, makes them tired, makes them go to sleep. The other thing, interestingly enough, is they could watch TV. The television set is usually far enough away. Blue light dissipates very quickly, dissipates at the inverse square law. So if I'm holding something right here, I wouldn't watch the TV right there. If the TV was right here, By the time the blue light gets to me, it's way past me. It's not going into my eyes very much at all. And from about 14 inches away, it mostly dissipates. The other thing that I told the kids is, watch a favorite or predictable show, something that they like. In fact, I said, if you really want to make yourself tired, watch a rerun, because it takes less brain processing to watch something that's familiar. If you watch a brand new show, you got to figure out, what's this character's name, who is he, what is he doing, what's he all about, what's the plot about. If you're watching a show that you know, you've got all those filled in, those blanks are all filled in. And the same thing goes for listening to music, but I tell the students, and I always tell them, make a playlist of songs that you can sing in your sleep. Because those are so familiar that you won't have to then keep your brain activated. And I told the students a hint too, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you have trouble going back to sleep when you wake up, besides not checking your phone, take your favorite song, whatever your favorite song is, take a small portion of it, a couple of seconds, and hum it to yourself in your brain over and over and over again. It'll put you to sleep like that. I use Hotel California, by the way. Works for me, puts me to sleep every time. So parents always want to know, what are sort of age-based recommendations? Everybody recommends moderate technology use in childhood. I recommend what I call a 1 to 5, 5 to 1 ratio. And what that is when kids are young, that for every minute that they use technology, and this is anything, TV, anything, for every 1 minute, 5 times as many minutes, they do something non-technological. So if they watch a 30-minute TV show, then they spend 150 minutes, if you can, doing something else that's non-technological. As they get older, by the time they're preteens, it's about 1 to 1. Meaning if they're going to be online for 30 minutes, then they have to be offline for 30 minutes. So it's equal. By the time they're teenagers, it's usually reversed, it's 5 to 1. So if they're online for 50 minutes, and maybe 10 minutes offline, I talked to them about this today and gave them some strategies of what to do, which I'm going to show you soon. I recommend that for kids, 30-minute max as kids, and most of the research shows that this is about the max that you should give the kids at any given time. And for teenagers, 2 hours max, at which point you have to do something. The American Academy of Pediatrics used to have a guideline that said absolutely no screen time before the age of 2. They have since backed off of that very recently, within the last month and a half. And their new guidelines, which I still don't like because I don't think they're possible. From 0 to 18 months, no screen time at all. Try taking a phone away from an 18-month-old. Good luck. It's very attractive. I don't believe that's true, but you can moderate it by using it in small amounts. 18 to 24 months, they say only high-quality TV and co-view, meaning you watch the TV with them and discuss it with them. 2 to 5 years, 1 hour per day, high-quality co-viewed, and then 6 and older, consistent time limits, and all ages. And this, I think, is important. I was talking to somebody earlier about this. They say create media-free zones, and media-free times and media-free zones. I like the idea of media-free zones. The kitchen table in my family is a media-free zone. No technology at the kitchen table. Some people use media-free zones as an area where everybody in the family watches television. That's a media-free zone. You can also create media-free times. The National Sleep Foundation talks particularly about not allowing kids to use phones while you're driving them someplace, using it as a time to talk to them. So how do you train the brain to focus? Very simple stuff. I'm going to give you several techniques. My favorite is called a technology break. It's sort of modeled after the old coffee break or cigarette break. The way it works, and we've been doing this in everywhere, in schools, homes, businesses, restaurants. The way it works is the following. You tell somebody, okay, we're going to start doing technology breaks. What I want you to do is imagine you're studying and you have a phone and you have a laptop. That's the typical setup. What I want you to do is to take 1 minute and look at anything you want on your phone and your laptop, and then close down your laptop, anything on your laptop that you don't need for studying, which means anything on there that has to do with communication that might distract you. And I tell the kids, don't minimize it because it'll be there. I said, don't minimize it because it'll be there staring at you, giving you little cues like, oh, you have one missing message on Facebook, you better check. Close it down, take your phone, flip off all the apps, flip them off, flip them off, flip them off so they're not there staring you in the face. Silence your phone, turn an alarm on for 15 minutes and put it right down in front of your face. Now let's no, enter. Put it right in front of your face. Why do I have to put it in front of your face? Because it's a stimulus to your brain that says, don't start leaking cortisol, you're going to get to me within 15 minutes. When the 15-minute alarm goes off, they get 1 minute to look at anything they want. At the end of 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 minute. You'll know when you get good at this, and I told the kids this today, that they'll know when they get good at this is when the alarm, the 15-minute alarm goes off, and they go, oh, just a minute, I gotta finish this paragraph, I gotta finish typing what I'm typing, I gotta finish reading this sentence, I wanna get a stopping point. That's the time you change it to 20 minutes, and then 25, and then 30. I think if you can get kids to do a 1 minute check-in, 30 minutes of focus time, 1 minute check-in, 30 minutes of focus time, 1 minute check-in, etc., you're doing great. Most people who try this in the home say that 1 minute turns out not to be enough, and that they give their kids 2 minutes. Whatever works. What this does is it trains your brain to not leak cortisol. That's really all it's doing. And then, since we don't have a red reset button, how do you reset your brain? Nature breaks. I recommend that everybody in the world, not just kids, but everybody, 90 minutes is the maximum that you should ever be in front of technology without a break. It overloads your brain. There's lots of research showing that it overloads your brain, that it gets your brain too hyper in certain areas of the brain that it shouldn't be. And so every 90 minutes you can take a 10-minute break. That's all it takes is 10 minutes. The best one to do to reset your brain is a nature break. Go outside without your phone. Look at the sky. Tell the students, look at the sky, look at the clouds, try to figure out what they're saying, look at trees, do anything you can for 10 minutes, and then come back. Other things that have been shown to work, listening to music works. About 10 minutes calms your brain. Looking at art, but it turns out the research study only shows that looking at art that you think is beautiful, not ugly, works. Exercise is an amazing thing. A lot of kindergarten classes now are having the kids run around and do exercise every 30 minutes or so. And the reason they're doing it is because it's been shown to calm their brains down. Same thing with meditation. There's a big push to put mindful meditation into elementary schools. You can do 10 minutes of mindful meditation, 10 minutes of sitting and relaxing. Your brain calms down, and then you're better able to go back and do what you need to do. Laughter works too. I always keep a joke book around. Hot bath works great. You know the old adage that you get your best ideas in the shower? It is absolutely true. When you're in the shower and the hot water hits you, what it does is it takes that default mode network, that daydreaming, mind-wandering network, and clicks it in. So a hot bath does the same thing. I don't recommend a hot bath every 90 minutes. Otherwise, I suspect you would look rather pruny. Talking live to a friend for 10 minutes works, but only if it's a positive conversation, which, as I like to joke, means I can't talk to my mother. Because for the first 5 minutes of the conversation, it's, you don't call me, Mom, I'm calling you. You don't ever call me, Mom, I'm calling you. That's what our conversations are like. That wouldn't calm me down. Practicing a foreign language and playing a musical instrument works too. These are all ways to calm your brain. So thank you very much for your time. I am happy to answer any questions you have, and I will even stay after and answer questions too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen.